there are 8 common words that we use in virtually every sentence we speak. These 8 words appear in virtually every thought that we have. And these 8 words, I've come to see, create havoc in our relationships and in our communications. These 8 words get in the way of our self-worth, and they impede and block change. So let's take a look at the 8 words. They are the to-be verbs: is, am, are, were, was, be, been, and becoming. So what issue do I have with these 8 words? Most verbs express movement. They're action, they're flowing, there's movement. But look at these verbs. They all have one singular thing in common. These verbs are all connoted by the fact that they are inert. They're fixed. They're not moving. Now think about it. Most sentences we use, most thoughts that we have these verbs in it. Now, if these verbs show no movement, and our thoughts and feelings are comprised of words, wouldn't it make sense that we would feel stuck? It does to me. So, who here believes it's hard to change? Show of hands. Quite a few of you. Most people believe it's hard to change. Well, it would be hard to change if our thoughts and perceptions and feelings are cemented in these to-be verbs. Change wouldn't seem easy. Now let's take that sentence, it's hard to change. It is being the to-be verb, it's hard to change. Take a moment and think about how you can say that sentence to yourself without a to-be verb. It may feel awkward, but take a moment, work on it. By a show of hands, does anyone have an answer to that? Just a few of you. It's so hard to say it without a to-be verb. It shows us how our thinking is cemented. So by the way, what it might sound like is, I find it hard to change. Change doesn't come easily for me. See, what I'm doing now is I am making subjective statements rather than objective statements. If we want to seek possibility in our lives, we need to access subjective statements, perceptions, attitudes through our own experience. We can't do it that way. Now, change does not need to be hard, but conceptually, if we stay stuck in these verbs, it's going to be very hard for us. Think about a sentence like, I'm a loser, or I'm an underachiever. Look at the am in those sentences. We get rooted, we become victims of self-esteem issues when our thoughts are rooted in to-be verbs. Now, how do we say that without the am? I feel like a loser. What's the difference? It's a vast difference. We can then explore, why do I feel that way? How long have I felt that way? What caused me to feel that way? And most importantly, what would be necessary for me to feel differently? Now, in my work, I have seen that when we have a self-esteem issue, some part of ourselves that doesn't feel good enough, it's rooted in a to-be verb. So, next exercise, take a moment and think about a core limiting belief you have about yourself. Have you got it? Is there a to-be verb in that statement? Certainly. Now, rethink it without a to-be verb. It may feel awkward just as it did before. But as you're thinking of it now without a to-be verb, you can see that it can shift. You're speaking subjectively about how you feel about yourself rather than how you are. Now, these to-be verbs tend to victimize us. They tend to get us stuck. Change becomes hard when we're rooted in to-be verbs. Let me provide a little historical context for you for a moment. I can't take credit for having imagined how removing to-be verbs can benefit us. It came to me when I was reading a book called Science and Sanity, written in 1933 by Alfred Korzybski. He first proposed removing to-be verbs. Now why? Well, in 1933, the author was very taken with what was happening in the world of quantum physics. Quantum physics was describing a reality altogether different than what we presumed it to be. So we have been operating on a 17th century worldview given to us by Sir Isaac Newton and René Descartes. Simply put, Newton suggested that reality looked like a giant machine. It's called a machine-like or a mechanistic universe, comprised of separate and distinct parts, disconnected from one another. Now, from those separate parts, we could come to a place of objectivity and a place of inertness. The problem was that in 1933, quantum physics was revealing that reality looked nothing like what Newton had described. Reality did not appear inert, fixed, as the to-be verbs describe. Reality presented itself as an inexorable, flowing, reality-making, possibility-laden universe where everything existed in a pure state of possibility. That's what caught my attention because I love possibility. So, one other thing. Newton's worldview also suggested that change was hard and there was a sense of separation, a filter of separation. You see, we became the disconnected cogs in that machine-like universe. And as such, we didn't have much meaning and purpose. We became disconnected. Now, through that filter of separation, that set up the concept of objectivity. To be objective means I must stand apart from you to see you. Now, that concept gets blown apart again by quantum physics. Physics is describing, as counterintuitive as this may sound, it's describing a reality which is one, seamless, inseparable, indivisible whole, just like the Eastern philosophies and spiritual traditions had always suggested. Now hard science was saying it. And the skeptic at this moment may say, well, but that's true in quantum physics. It's not true in our everyday lives. Not true. Over the last number of decades, we're seeing that what exists in the micro world exists in our world as well. So 2 takeaways here. Objectivity requires separation, but there doesn't appear to be any separation. But we're still using verbs that make objective statements. The other piece is the change arguably is not hard because quantum physics describes flow, change, as the order of the universe. So if we've been operating from a wrong worldview and a wrong game plan rooted in these 2 be verbs, we're kind of stuck. One more thing. Quantum physics also describes that reality is thoroughly uncertain. Now, ordinarily, we seek certainty and predictability in our lives, and to an extreme, it causes dysfunction. Our addiction to certainty results in distress and fear and anxiety because we can't know the future. It's unknowable. If we need to know it, we're going to dysfunction. So I had a thought, which was, if I can embrace uncertainty, that leads me to the possibilities that I'm seeking. In fact, I wrote a book about that. Now, certainty, think 2 be verbs here, certainty forecloses on possibilities. It shuts down possibilities. So I began to look at these messages from quantum physics. I understood what it is that catalyzed the thinking of the author, Korzybski. Now, by the way, he called this E-prime language. I don't know why, but E-prime stands for no 2 be verbs. A number of years ago, I was summoned for jury duty. It was an alleged drunk driving case. I'm sitting on the witness stand, and the prosecutor asks me what question? He asks me, can you be objective? Well, I said, that's the wrong person to ask that question of. So I gave him a brief recitation about why I couldn't be. Now the judge peers down at me, and he says to me, well, what question should we ask you? I said, Judge, let me ask you a question first. Do you have beliefs? He thought I was out of my mind. He said, of course I have beliefs. I said, well, a belief is a bias. We're human beings. We are not objective cogs in Newton's machine. I said to him, so what you should ask is, can I be in touch with my bias and still feel I can do a fair job? He dismissed me and asked for a copy of the book. Over the years that I have been sharing and working with E-Prime language with my clients, I see tremendous benefits. Let me move back to some more of the applications and benefits to be derived. The to-be verbs can keep us stuck in a state of victimhood, as I started to reference earlier. I was working with a middle-aged woman whose core belief was, I am stupid. No matter how much I tried to penetrate that belief, I wasn't successful. So I asked her, how did you come to believe you're stupid? Now notice what I did. I used the word believe. I took her fact, I am stupid, and I pivoted and I made it a belief. How did you come to believe it? So she shares that her father, when she was a little girl, would often say to her, you're so stupid. And she said, and my grades in school were poor. So that confirmed it. I said, so imagine if your father never said you were stupid, or you had a different dad. Might you have done better in school? Begrudgingly, she says, I guess so. I said, so is it possible that you're not stupid, but you feel stupid? And what would be required for you not to feel stupid? The shift was underway. Nowhere do I see as great an advantage to E-Prime, no to-be verbs, as I do in relationships. Relationships seem to deteriorate and fall into conflict when we make objective statements around personal feelings. Personal feelings should be shared as personal feelings, not as objective truths. What happens to you when someone says to you, you're wrong, you are wrong? It's the end of the conversation. You're not listening, maybe you're preparing your rebuttal, your blood pressure is up. Now, in E-Prime language, how would we say you're wrong? It might sound like, I'm having trouble following your point. I can't understand your position. Help me understand. It's an inviting in of one another's experiences. I was working with a couple quite a number of years ago, and I recall the moment when she said to her husband, you are so selfish. I could feel the air thicken. I knew what was coming. It was his fierce rebuttal. So I said, time out, guys. I had been teaching them E-Prime, no to-be. So I prepped her and I said, could you share that in E-Prime? So she thought about it and she said, I find you, I experience you as a self-centered person. Sounds awkward. But he then paused and said, I don't understand that. I see myself quite altogether different as being generous of spirit. They were then able to have a real, genuine discussion about how she experienced him. That moves to the heart of the matter. Does it make sense to argue about is he or isn't he selfish? Or does it make more sense to move into empathy and compassion? This man said to his wife, I love you. But to act lovingly, you have to care how the other feels, even if you don't agree. When we speak in terms of feeling like that, it opens the pathway to a generative dialogue. It makes no sense to argue about the truth in personal matters. Now, there are objective, discernible truths that I'm sure all of us agree to. But here I'm talking about personal interactions. The death knell of resilience in emotional and verbal intimacy is to speak objectively. We need to speak subjectively from my own experience and invite the other one in. Now, I'm not proposing that you need to be fanatical about speaking without to-be verbs. I no doubt have used the to-be verb a number of times already today. But in critical moments, in critical situations where you're anticipating a negative reaction or a defensive reaction, pause. Start your sentence with, I think, I feel.